Good evening, James. Unfortunately, I will have to work and again tonight, and I will not be home when you get home from school. I hope you had a wonderful day at school. It is now Tuesday, and I love you very much, and I miss you. And I wish time zones were different and I got to see you more. But unfortunately, they're not. And so, as much as I want to be there to actually read you a bedtime story, and as much as I should be there to read you a bedtime story, I can't. So I'm hoping these videos will have to do in place until we can be together again and I can read to you every night, or as close to every night as possible. Where we left off. Well, at this point, George has been running from the pterodactyls and the lizards, and he met a soldier from World War I. How cool is that? And that soldier obliterated the pterodactyl with his gun, and then started to destroy the lizards, and made George choose whether to live or to die. George chose to live. And so the gunner picked him up and started carrying him through the park. And while no one else could see the gunner, or the pterodactyl, or the lizards, one person could. And that person's name is Eddie. And she stopped the bus and escaped and went chasing after them because she thought she was the only one that could see. And that's where we pick up. Chapter 7. Parking. The gunner pulled George to a halt in the intricate tracery of shadows cast by the neon light above the spreading plane tree. He looked all around. George concentrated on getting oxygen into his lungs. He waited until he'd gotten enough for a short question. Are we safe? The gunner just set off again, but this time George noticed that it wasn't a headlong run. It was more like a game of hide and seek, where the gunner flitted them from one pool of shadow to the next, always keeping an eye behind them for whatever it was that seemed to be stalking them. Now that they were moving slower, George's brain had room for more than just the terror and a hard job of breathing, despite the stitch in his side. Thoughts tumbled into his head, hopping in on top of each other, before he could really focus on them, like watching TV while someone else held the remote and speed-hopped the channels. He thought of killing Beck. He thought of home, the empty house where his mother would not be there to miss him yet. He wondered if and when she'd notice. He flashed a horrible image of the pterodactyl crawling towards him over the stationary traffic. He thought of his mobile phone, stuck in his backpack, unclaimed in the dark recesses of the museum cloakroom. He saw the stone salamanders writhing into strike in front of him, ready to kill. And then he was sick. As the gunner tried to pull him on, he kept his hand on a thin plane tree and bent over and was sick. Twice. Then, his stomach tried for a hat trick, but there was nothing left but hot, prickling sensation all over the back of his neck, and a tremor that calmed as the gunner put a big hand on his shoulder. "All right now?" he asked. George shook his head. "You done well there. Didn't get any on your shoes or anything. Hold on." He suddenly hoisted George into his arms and stepped over the low wall on the edge of the park. George opened his mouth, but then the lurching sensation of falling into a deep space took the words out of him, unsaid. There was a jolting instant of rushing vertigo before the gunner's boots crashed to the concrete. George looked around to see that they had jumped over the wall into a 15-foot drop that ended on the ramp into an underground parking garage. The gunner set him on his feet and walked him very quietly down the ramp into the subterranean space. The parking garage was empty of people and full of cars. Somewhere in the distance came the lonely sound of a tire shrieking in protest. But right now, the gunner and George were the only figures among the bonnets and the windshields stretched out below the fluorescent lights. The gunner walked between two cars, found a shadow behind a concrete pillar, and hunkered down again. George looked at him. "What are we doing?" "Waiting." "What are we waiting for?" For it to go away. What is it? Don't know. Want to get back up there and have a look, see? George didn't. Besides, you're run out. That's why you chucked it all up. There's a point of exhaustion and you just ran through it. It's like horses. You just need to lie up there a bit. I was good with horses. George noticed that the gunner had a bridle chain tucked into his belt, under the cape. The gunner noticed him looking. Horse artillery. We pulled the guns through the mud and tried not to kill the old nags doing it. Lose a horse, lose the guns. Lose the guns, lose the battle. Lose enough battles, and well... He seemed to catch himself. George thought it looked like he was pulling himself back into the here and now from somewhere a long way off. Anyhow, this ain't about that. Get your breath. The gunner retrieved his part-smoked butt and fired it up. George looked at him, then at the 5 sprinklers in the ceiling. The gunner's eyes stayed on George's, through the smoke curling roofward from the cigarette. What? I don't think, began George. Yeah? I don't think you can smoke in here. The gunner's eyes held steady, but something rippled under his dog bronze skin, something near his mouth. Despite himself, George felt an answering twitch on his face. The last thing in the world he felt like doing was smiling. But as the gunner's face cracked, he felt his face going with it. And like a small crack that signals the dam is going to burst, the gunner began to laugh. And so did he. Can't smoke! Can't smoke! The gunner was laughing like a deep rolling bell. George's laughter fired along underneath it, sharper, thinner, and echoing with hysteria. Somehow, all the fear and incomprehension found a voice in his laughter. He had no idea why things were so funny, only that the laughter was right. He flashed a memory of his dad belching at the dinner table, responding to his mom's disapproval with a cheery, "Better out than in." That's what this felt like. This laughing on the shank end of terror. He had no idea what was finding voice in his laughter, but he knew it was better out than in. Keeping it in would have burst something inside. The gunner wiped his eyes. Can't smoke? I can step off a monument in the heart of the city and shoot me 4 taints and drag you through the park double time, and no beggar sees me, no one turns a hair, and you say I can't spark up? God's truth? He stopped laughing. George rolled on for a bit, and then dried up as inexplicably as he'd begun. And he felt the gunner waiting for him. You need to pay attention, son, because whatever you woke up thinking were the rules, well, up's still up and down's still down, but everything in between, all bets are off. It's a whole new ball of chalk. He kept George in the grip of his eyes as he blew his long plume of smoke right at the fire sprinkler. What do you mean? I mean, you want to survive this. You need to think first and ask the right questions. And what do you mean? Ain't the right question. George started to shiver. He opened his mouth, thought some more, shut it. The gunner grunted approvingly. That's good. Engage the brain before running your mouth. Don't worry about the shivering. It's shock. It'll pass, or you'll go a little doolally for a bit. I don't want to go doolally. Might not be the worst thing that could happen. George looked at the damp concrete at his feet. I think I went doolally a while ago. I think all this is doolally. I think someone's put drugs in my food or something. I think this isn't happening. The gunner just looked at him. George wondered if he'd gone back to being a statue. Look, George said after a pause. Please tell me what's happening. Please tell me what you are. Tell me what those things are, please. The gunner tapped his chest. I'm a statue. They're statues, carvings, whatever. That's all we got in common. I'm a spit, they're taints. Taints hate spits. Spits don't care much for the taints because of it. You could say there's been a zip between us since the first man thought of carving something and putting a little of himself into it. We're both made, see? Both created by craftsmen, or even artists. Don't matter which. We call them both makers. But we're as different as chalk from cheese. Taints are evil? Don't know about evil. They're just bad. See, there's nothing human in them. They was made to frighten, to be ugly, to leer you off of church roofs and to put shivers up you. Gargoyles. Yeah, sort of. I mean, all gargoyles is taints, but not all taints are gargoyles, if you follow me. But things like gargoyles was made to remind you about hell, meant to outshout the devil. Nothing human in 'em. Empty. And like all empty things, they're hungry. Not for food, though. Hungry for what makes you, you, and me, me. George thought of the pterodactyl's toothy beak, and the look in its eye, and knew just what the gunner meant. Though, of course, I'm less me than you are you. Me being a spit and all. What do you mean? Asked George. Although as he asked it, somewhere inside him, he thought he knew. Thought he'd been told this before. Thought that if he'd stopped and tried, he could remember the answer. Before it came to him, the gunner spoke. A spit is a statue that the maker, a sculptor, stone carver, whatever, has made to represent someone human. And because of that, while a maker works, something of that must flow into us, and it fills that hole, and the taints have been eaten away inside of them. I mean, a statue of Lord Kitchener ain't Lord Kitchener, but he's what the artist thought and knew about Lord Kitchener. It's like he's got a spark of Kitchener's spirit in him. He's the spirit and image of Lord Kitchener. The spit and image, if you like. That make sense? George needed to think before he answered. He knew about sculptors. He remembered talk about putting something of yourself into things. Other talk of things coming alive beneath your hands. He felt the plasticine in his pocket. He nodded slowly. So who are you? I'm the gunner. No one special. Just a soldier from the Great War. The only other name I got's the name of the man who made me. Just like you got the name of the man who made you. Whatever your name is. Chapman. I'm George Chapman. I'm Jagger. My name was Charles Sargent Jagger, so I'm a Jagger. You got a big family? No. I got a few. There's Jaggers all over London. Jagger did well out of the war. People liked what he'd done, making us look like heroes. But no crowing about it. Made us look like men who knew about mud and dying first. Then made us look like heroes after. For them that had lost sons and husbands, we looked like the men they wanted to remember them as. The men they'd hoped they'd have become before the bloody generals sent them out to be butchered. So I call you Jagger? The gunner had gone still and was looking up. What? The gunner looked at him and held a finger to his lips. Quiet as a mouse. He eased the revolver from his holster. Cat's on the roof. Chapter 8. The Cat on the Roof. The parking garage had a roof made of concrete reinforced with a grid of metal rods. It was about 2 feet thick. Above that was 8 feet of earth, thick and sticky like modeling clay. The earth was reinforced by its own web of tree roots, crisscrossing over and under themselves as each tree sent feelers out into the clay in a microscopically slow explosion, searching for water and food. This network itself was laced with tunnels made by earthworms burrowing blindly beneath the park as they went about their business. And on top of all this was the grass, white roots in the clay, green shoots above it, searching for the air, trying to breathe something clean through the exhaust fumes of the sea of traffic endlessly growling past on Park Lane. In 3 inches of grass atop of the clay was a tiny world of insects, going about their daily grind as thoughtlessly and as relentlessly as the human inhabitants from the city around them. There were ants, there were ladybirds, and for a moment there was a beetle. Eddie saw it quite clearly, its shiny black back reflecting orange glow from the streetlights as it moved slowly from a discarded cigarette pack towards a pile of vomit. She knew the little pyramid in the grass was vomit because she could smell it. She could smell it better than she would have liked because her nose was on the ground like the rest of her, splayed beneath a bush, hardly breathing. She knew the beetle was a beetle, but wasn't any more, because she saw the gargoyle land 3 feet in front of her, saw its stone claw plosh into the clay beneath. Eddie edged back into the shadows under the bush, trying to move as imperceptibly and as silently as the tree roots beneath her. In her left hand was a small glass disc, glowing blue between her fingers. It was also hot. She slipped it in her pocket without taking her eye off the stone claw 4 feet from her nose. She didn't need a warning glass anymore. The thing was here. It was much too here for comfort. It was a limestone gargoyle with the face of a snarling cat and the horns of a small devil. It had wings, but no arms, and long, powerful legs that ended in the beetle-crushing foot claws Eddie was staring at. Its eyes were blank stone like the rest of it. The set of its eyebrows was fierce and angry. A century and a half of weather had stained the stone in streaks of black and gray. And somewhere in the past, a hard frost had expanded the water in a crack in its right wing, and a section had fallen off, giving it a lopsided, battle-worn quality. Eddie knew she was good, unnaturally good, at not being seen when she wanted to remain unnoticed. But she wished she was even better at it as she watched the cat gargoyle bend low to the ground and sniff. As it breathed out, she heard a low whistle, like someone blowing across the mouth of a bottle. It moved its head from side to side across the ground, trying to pick up a scent. Eddie decided to stop edging backward and tried to make herself invisible instead. The cat gargoyle moved away from her and towards the parapet over which George and the gunner had disappeared, and turned away to make its sniff and whistle noise, scenting along the top of the wall. Eddie allowed herself a deep breath. She also had a good opportunity to see the sharp ridge of vertebrae running down its back, like a line of giant thorns trying to burst through the taut stone skin. She could see the dense feline muscles bunch and relax as it moved to and fro, as if it were dancing in a slow trance led by its nose. And then Eddie saw the woman with the stroller and the spaniel hurrying through the orange gloom, obviously late for something and unhappy about it. The spaniel was running ahead of the woman, ears flapping happily. And then it stopped. Its ears went back and it growled. Eddie's first thought was that it had seen the cat gargoyle 6 feet ahead of it. The cat gargoyle turned and looked at the dog. The woman snapped her fingers at the dog as she was passed on the strip of the pathway. "Bramble, come here! Bramble!" Bramble was frozen in a trembling rigor in front of the cat gargoyle. Spaniels don't get many ideas, so when one takes hold, they tend to stick with it. And with a horrible feeling in her stomach, Eddie realized the thought that Bramble was having about not being able to see the gargoyle. It was about sensing her under the bush. "Bramble, come!" the woman called. She left the stroller and walked towards the dog and the gargoyle. The gargoyle took a step backwards and crouched, drawing its wings open parallel to the ground, ready to scythe into action. Eddie noticed that the ends of the wings had sharp hooks on them. She'd seen a bullfighter once on the TV, and he made the same gesture with his cape, stepping back, spreading the cape behind him, hiding the sword, seeming innocent, but ready to kill when the bull got close enough. The woman walked right past the gargoyle. Eddie thought she must have brushed it with her coat, but she clearly could not see it any more than her dog could. She grabbed the spaniel and clipped the leash to its collar. "Come on! Bad dog! There's nothing there!" She snapped as she pulled the spaniel away. The dog started to bark over its shoulder, the bark getting louder and farther as his mistress pulled it. The bark ended in a yelp as the dog was swatted over the nose and attached to the stroller, whose occupant had now started squealing and yelling. There was a flurry of wind in the trees above, and the woman grimaced. She pulled the umbrella from the bags hung on the back of the stroller and opened it one-handed. "Come on, it's going to rain. We've got to get home. Good dog." The smack on the nose had dislodged the thought of Eddie from the spaniel's mind, and she trotted after the cooling mother, who trundled off into the darkness, putting the rain hood over the baby as she went. Eddie was about to breathe again when she realized something chilling. The cat gargoyle remained braced and ready to attack, but its head had slowly turned and looked back over its shoulder in the direction the dog had barked, toward Eddie. Suddenly, so fast as your eyes had to twist to keep up, it switched position of its body so it faced her bush, keeping the claw-tipped wings spread in a nasty echo of the umbrella. Eddie had just watched the woman unfurl it, crouched lower to the ground, and sniffed toward her. Very slowly, one wingtip pushed the brush aside, and suddenly Eddie had nowhere to run, and the stone eyes looked at her. Eddie had time to note that the whistling breath came from a corroded copper pipe sticking straight out of the thing's mouth, like a gun barrel. Eddie reached to the pocket and pulled out the disc of glass. Where it had glowed blue, it now blazed like a torch, like a blue-green torch. She held it out straight at the end of her arm, with only the merest fraction of a shake. The rest of the shake was in her voice. Go away. She cleared her throat, lost the shake from her voice, and tried again. Go away. You have to go away. One stone eyebrow rose in a question, and then the fierce snarl stretched even further back, and the horns flattened like a dog's ears had, and it didn't go away at all. It stepped toward her, pulling the bush apart, opening her to the world and whatever it was about to do. And then the rain came, a spitter, a spatter, and then all at once like a block falling from the sky. Eddie saw her jaw and glared defiantly at the stone eyes through the falling water. You don't scare me, she lied. Nothing scares me, not anymore. You can't hurt me. You have to go away. The cat gargoyle shook itself in a shiver, looked her in the eyes. You don't scare me, she lied again. And then the cat gargoyle jumped, backward, up into the sky, into the rain, away from her. Eddie stared very hard at the place where it had been, until her eyes had convinced her brain that there was nothing to see except rain and grass and the ugly orange light. She looked at the glass disc in her hand. As she was staring at it, the light died in it, and it looked like what it was, an old piece of sea glass, the bottom of a bottle washed to and fro by the tide, worn smooth by pebbles and sand, something anyone might find on a day at the sea. She stuffed it back into the pocket of her sheepskin jacket, took several breaths, and headed across the grass, down onto the ramp of the parking garage. Well, James, that's it for tonight. I'll have another one for you tomorrow night. I love you. Good night. Stay upstairs. Continue to do good. I'm proud of you. Sleep well, and I'll speak to you in the morning.